Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. The official opening is at 7, but we are very happy to welcome you for an introducing talk between François Piron and Lilou Vidal. Lilou Vidal is the curator of the exhibition that we're going to open tonight. She is, amongst other, the founder of Bureau des Réalités in Brussels, where she did an exhibition featuring the works of Guy Mees in 2016, which in a way was also the point of departure for the excellent exhibition that we are all going to see later after this talk. She's in a conversation with François Piron, who's here tonight because he contributed the main essay to the publication, which is already there, almost. We just need to send the PDF to the printer. So very soon we will have a very comprehensive publication on the work of Guy Mees, featuring the works which are in this exhibition, but also very rare archival material. Lilou Vidal spent a lot of time with the estate of Guy Mees and discovered some really amazing photos, correspondences, etc. François Piron was the director of the 5th edition of Les Ateliers des Rennes in 2016. He's a freelance curator, an art critic and an editor. Amongst others, he edited the writings of Guy de Conté. And he is co-founder of Castillo Corrales in Paris. And he runs the postgraduate program of the École Nationale Supérieure des Beaux-Arts in Lyon. And in general, he's an expert on contemporary art, but also on art of the 60s and 70s. And together with Lilou Vidal, he will introduce you and make you familiar with the work of Guy Mees, and also contextualize his work within the broader framework of the European avant-garde of the 60s and 70s and even 80s, hopefully, of course, in a nutshell. Thank you for being here, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Before to start, I'm gonna project this video I received from someone when I did this exhibition dedicated to the archive of Guy Mees in Brussels at Bureau des Réalités. It's documents coming from Chris Stratling, very interesting documents, knowing that we're gonna talk about the peripheric source and accidental images we found around the work of Guy Mees. Actually, it's a fragment of a VHS video when the camera was on autofocus, so nobody's know they are filmed, and at some point it will be just in front of Guy Mees. After a talk given by Thierry de Duve in 1989 at Galerie Michelin-Schweizer around the work of Marthe Véry. So that's just when I'm doing this introduction talk. I wanted to give you this little present. So it's an honor to be back in Vienna after a few years. Thank you, Nikolaus, for inviting me to present this first exhibition of Guy Mees in Australia. I'm very happy to make this introduction with François Piron, who contributed to the book with a fantastic and brilliant essay. So before to start a conversation, the corner of the eye, I would like to give you a little introduction about Guy Mees. Who is Guy Mees? Guy Mees was born in 1935 and died in 2003. He was a central figure of the Belgian avant-garde. His work has been really known in Belgium since the 60s, but he's still, we can say, rather unknown abroad. This is one of the first institutional show since the death of the artist into abroad. And there is many reasons about this. Probably some related with a local history of the Belgian avant-garde, the fact that A lot of artists from his generation had suffered of the lack of support from the institution at the time for the Belgian artists. They even, with several artists like Jeff Gaze, Lily Dujury, Guy Mees, they even made an action against an exhibition they did at Palais des Beaux-Arts in 1977 around American art. So it was also due to the fact that they depended on the, that's Miss Jean Schweizer, by the way, that's who is here tonight with us. And it was also due to the fact that they were defended by a very important gallery as Wide Wide Space, we might have heard, who was very important platform of the international avant-garde at the time, representing the work of Dan Flavin, Dan Graham, Kossuth, etc. And then Wide Wide Space closed in 1976. MTL, who was also very, very important gallery in the 70s, represented a major international avant-garde scene with Saul Lewitt, Hugh Blair, Kossuth Baldessari, Dan Graham, Buren, Kadere, Brotars, and Stanley Brown. And Guy Mees was among all those artists, but his work still quite unknown comparing them. So we should again wonder why. And this is probably due to the fact that his oeuvre, we cannot range his oeuvre to the, to classical aesthetic or category. He's really this kind of artist on the margins of the international style. And I think he did it on purpose. When you will see the exhibition and the different works he presented related to the structuralist sculpture or the minimalist sculpture, you will see it was always a kind of oblique attitude regarding all those international movements. Quite critical, but very specific. And also, of course, something very important for people who know Guy Mees is related to the fact that these artists always try to escape any theoretic or analytical discussion. So it's almost a paradox that we are giving a talk now tonight about him, but we will try to respect some enigma about his work. So the title of the exhibition, "The Weather is Quiet, Cool and Soft," is came from a note by Guy Mees on a work on paper, and it pays homage to this kind of atmospheric approach we find in the work of Guy Mees, in the sense that everything is related with something with the aleatory things of life, the fragility of life, and also the fact to talk about the weather bring us to the fields of the modesty and a very down-to-earth attitude, the simplicity, some way, which is a very well. This is Guy Mees, who doesn't know is filmed after a talk. So let's go quite fast because we have so many things to say. Yeah. So before to start our discussion with François, if I have to give like two words to define his work, I will say like the notion of hierarchy and the pictorial were like the main things you will find from the beginning of his work since the 1960 until the end of his career. So the corner of the eye discussing Guy Mees. Everybody who knew Guy Mees mentioned the way he always tried to escape any definition around his work. So we thought it was interesting that we present some lost images, some peripheral documents. Let's wait. I think it's gonna stop soon, but maybe I should go directly to the image and we continue. If you don't mind, I stop the document. No thanks. Okay. So Guy Mees gave the enigmatic title "Lost Space" to two body of works. first one he created in the early 60s, made with geometric shape, like really into the vocabulary of minimalism, but covered with a very specific texture of lace, very sensual, related with the vernacular Belgium history of, you know, the history of, for people who know Belgium, they know that there is this tradition of lace, but it's industrial lace, and it's super interesting to see that he wanted to confront this kind of rationalistic approach with something related with the vernacular and, let's say, with real sensuality as well, because it's also connected with femininity. And this is something we're going to discuss with François, the question of the gender that Guy Mees succeed to question during his whole life. And he gave also this title to a second body of work, which are paper cut out in almost 30 years later, which are aesthetically very different, but that contain also the question of we can say the loss of the pictorial space, but we're gonna discuss about that. So where this title is coming from? Actually, it's coming from a text which has been written by a friend of him in the 60s, Willem Joris Lagrillière, who was a copywriter into a company advertising company. So it's interesting because it's a kind of ghostwriting, and this text is also has been rewritten through an association process, because it's coming from his very old friend Wim Mees, and we're going to talk about it with François. So François, I propose you read the text of Lost Space.
The lost space is an adjoining space. The lost space is complementary to present-day living space. The lost space does not have a clear-cut function. The lost space is space as utility object in which bombast becomes more difficult and tangibility easier. The lost space is simply the body, defined by shape, color, taste, smell, and sound. So this is very enigmatic as a manifesto. And to try to define what Guy Mees means by this lost space is not clearly easy to grasp. I guess that if he wanted to be more clear, he would have written a different statement, and his aim was to remain ambiguous. There are many ways, I would think, to define what means lost in this context. One way to think about it would be to consider a sort of quest where you would try to find what has been lost. But another meaning has to do, I think, with the idea of function, to the lack of function, to a defunctionalization. And I think it might be on this side where Guy Mees would stand. And it would then be, to my opinion, a comment on rationality, on modernity as functionalist, and a comment and a sort of critical comment to the affirmative presence of the modernist artist. But typically, Mees opens a space in with this lost space, which remains open-ended and with no clear shape. And it is very typical of his attitude to open up spaces between polarities. You will see when we will browse his work that he's someone who has always been dealing with paradoxes, oxymorons, contradictions, and especially opening a space between the yes and the no, like the acceptance and the refusal, which I would, or we could compare with a sort of Bartleby attitude, this character from Melville, who would always answer, "I would prefer not to," which I think is a sort of resistance between active and passive resistance to the order of things, to the social order or the institutional order, through a resistance through, I would say, maybe a sort of weakness, a sort of minor resistance, like in the title of this film by Fischli and Weiss. Can I go on a little with this? So I would suggest that we should not only attach to the words of this manifesto, but especially to the tone. And I think it's there we have a combination in this manifesto of affirmative and negative propositions, explaining more or less what is and what is not the lost space. And especially I find interesting this notion of negative definition, as it is something that you can only perceive and possibly understand when it is missing, when it's only through the absence of definition that you can access to this notion of lost space.
Thank you. And I think it was also interesting that we show you two documents regarding the origin of this title. One document that we found recently, coming from the archive of Wien Mewissen, the ongerupte actually, which means the untouched space. So actually the first text was related with an untouched space, a lost space. And when I did the interview for the book we are editing with Sternberg, Wim Mewissen, the very close friend of Guy Mees, explained me where it came from, because he is the one who wrote this text. And actually, he was referring to a lot. You might recognize your house normally through this drawing in Kaiserstraat. So he was referring to the space on the attic, actually, that was dedicated to nothing, just an empty space where apparently he used to meet some friends, poets discussing arts. It was just a sofa there, like a window, and a table that a Klein table. We won't go into the detail of this, but he had to build a table for Klein. And this room was totally empty, just imagining the Klein table with the blue reflecting into this white space. I think it's quite interesting to know the origin of this name that has been transformed later on with Willem Joris Lagrière to the lost space. As you see here it has been annotated by Guy. Guy transformed some sentences, even if he was not someone of word. But knowing this, the Klein table, the ongerupte ruimte, I think it's also interesting to look at some detail he took from in his studio of some lace work as a kind of chromatic palette, you know, and like this idea of a diffuse light. You see what I mean, François?
What are these? You should explain the status of these images.
So actually, this is our slides I found in the archive of the artist, and they are just like pieces of detailed images of his lace work, like with the neon, and I thought it was interesting also to put it in parallel with the ongerupte ruimte, the untouched space, and the Klein blue table, you know. What do you think? Do you see the link? We can switch to another image if you want. Okay. So let's talk about this image, because this image appears quite a lot for this exhibition. You will see it into the archive, into the little booklet here. So this is Guy Mees, but it's a quite surprising image, because he was not that kind of artist to be on stage and acting or performing himself into a strange position. He was more always related with a kind of ordinary attitude. And I was really wondering about these images, actually. These images has been took by Marc Poirier-Dicollier, the gallerist from X1 in Antwerp. And I wanted to. I asked, like in the interview, the opinion of Micheline Schweizer, Dirk Snowart, and Wim about these images, knowing if it was a kind of reaction to the Spatialismo, the manifest, the White Manifesto from Lucio Fontana and all his team in 1946, and one they dedicated to the spatial movement for television in 1952. I thought like maybe it was a kind of skeptical answer or kind of absurdist answer to this manifesto, knowing that Guy Mees knew very well Fontana. He did a very important exhibition in 1965, the Zero International Avant-Garde in his atelier in Milan. And then I was doing some little research, and I found it was super interesting to wonder about that, as we can read in the Manifesto of Spatial Movement for Television, like a quote: "We, the spatialists, will broadcast on television for the first time in this world a new form of art based on the spatial concepts." I mean, it can be a reaction, we don't know, but that's a kind of interpretation we had. You want to add something?
What is important to stress is that the work of Guy Mees spans 4 decades. Starts in the late 1950s, and you will see in the exhibition that his work is very diverse, and sometimes you have the feeling that it could be a group show and not a solo exhibition. And it has a strange relationship with a lot of movements that he has approached, he has been involved in, but never stayed within one category. I think it's really part of his state of mind, of his attitude, to exert a certain skepticism as soon as things are taken for granted.
To stay on the margins quite often.
Yeah, but I think he's been very sincere in participating in the discussions of his time and being involved in many of the political views and the political concerns of his time, but at the very moment when it starts to crystallize into a style, then he would step back or step aside and move to something else. And I think this is an image that expresses also a sort of irony. You said that he was someone that would not be used to make a spectacle of himself, and this sort of stereotype dealing with a technological object, wearing this psychedelic glasses, is a sort of expression of being in and out of the concerts of his time.
Yeah, and he's wearing a tie made of lace. Let's have a look closer to those tie. Okay, so this is something important also. We talk about this fabric, this very specific idiosyncratic fabric into the work of Guy. And this is super important. Guy was saying that it's the only masculine attribute that is actually moving, the dancing like dress, you know, from man, like little skirts. And he decided to cover with lace. It's not just a kind of humoristic or approach. I think it's also very related with this idea of authority, you know, the question of the gender we find in his work. And here I would like to make François reacting about that. He's quoting in the text he wrote in the catalogue. He's quoting. Where it is? Yeah, you're talking about the devirilization of painting, of art.
It's something I became really interested in when writing this essay for you. That I saw in different aspects of Guy Mees' attitude, but consistently a certain critique of masculinity, not as I'm not speaking about his life, but I'm speaking about his work. A critique of masculinity in terms of a critique of authority, of affirmation, of repetition, and all these systems in closed circuit that have been usually the ways of doing of male artists in the modernity and even in the postmodernity. We will see that in his relationship, for instance, with minimalism. So you have seen some examples of his works, his lost spaces from the 1960s. So using lace as a very unusual material involved in this, let's say, minimalist vocabulary, and again in his relationship with conceptual art, he will also contradict or like thwart the idea, the semiology of conceptual art as something systemic, as something that aims at creating identities through systems. And in his case, there is always a contradiction involved. Maybe we could go to
the little box are contradictional, we can say, because they are like you know, they look like panty box, but actually Lot did it, but they look like the panty box in which he put the lace. I think it's also interesting. Alors, we continue. Yeah, let's talk about that, because this is not presented in the exhibition. We are just showing the document in the archive vitrine of an action he did in 1969, the 1st January 1969, where he declared an ice floe, an iceberg, undefiled, untouched during 120 hours. So related to this action, we found recently a map. I'm sorry, because that image is from the book, and actually the image is not. Well, imagine there is another part on the other side, sorry. And on which he traced a line pointing the designated space of the iceberg. And actually, I think it was also interesting to show that, again, about this contradiction, we are not purely into a conceptual statement. There is immediately a need of tactility, tangibility, is tracing the line, is showing the spot. So let's continue. François, would you talk about water to water?
It's a good example of his like sincere, I think, interest for some political views of his time, and in this case for ecological concerns. This is a quite unique action. Like he's not being involved so much in performance as such, but this is an action that he did on a river in Belgium, a very polluted river, and as a sort of ecological statement, he would throw inside the river a plexiglass bowl, which was filled with pure water. Yeah. I mean, actually, demineralized water, which is this sort of symbolic action that can recall Hans Haecke or Gustav Metzger works of the same period, works that have a sort of symbolic meaning and a sort of homeopathic function, which I think also contain paradoxes.
And a bit of absurdity also, because the plexiglass ball explode. I mean, they polluted more the canal.
Oh, this is clearly bound to failure. And
yes.
And it's not. I mean, it is not grandiloquent. It's a very modest, almost invisible action, immediately bound to failure. But what I find interesting is that on one hand you have a sort of sincerity in the movement of this action, and at the same time a certain skepticism. He knows what's going to happen when it's not that the ball will explode, and it reminds me that the kind of paradoxes between sincerity and skepticism that one can observe in many of his works.
I think we have so many images that we have to. Okay.
Okay, this is interesting in relationship to
yes.
gender and minimalism.
Exactly.
So this work is in the exhibition. These two works are in the exhibition.
Okay, yeah. Those work has been rediscovered recently, actually. They haven't been presented since the 70s. It's the first time it's presented into an institution. And even in the 93 at Palais des Beaux-Arts, we haven't seen it. So we're super happy we are able to present them, because they also highlight the intention of Guy regarding all those ideas around structuralism, minimalism. Actually, he put the negative forms of those industrial, let's say, viril objects in front of them, showing a commodity, a tool, actually, to protect them on the same ground, on the same level than the artwork. And of course, they are done. They have.
So on the
yes, sorry.
On the left, you have. I'm talking about the image on your right. Yeah. On the left part of this image, you have this chromed metal kind of rulers.
You see the white things. We're talking about the white things on the
and on the opposite,
right.
You have their counterparts, which are sorts of gloves or socks, in which are the same exact measurements as the metal plates, but in white cotton.
Yeah, you will see it in the show.
And they are technically they were designed to protect and to preserve the metal plates, but once installed, they act as their negative space, and they also contradict, as you said before, the sort of cold rationalistic aesthetic of these metal plates with a soft handmade cotton, which in a way I think acts as a sort of devirilization of the minimalist aesthetics.
Or feminization.
Or feminization, maybe.
Yeah.
I see it more as a critique. It doesn't aim to be transgender, but it's a critique of masculinity.
So about those work related with structuralism, there is also an important document in the Vitrine archive. In the show, you will see a listing actually the material and the number of the modules for each work in plexiglass, chrome, and aluminium. And it's very interesting because actually it brings us to the question of authorship, which was also super important for Guy Mees. Everybody could do the work having this information, you know. So that's also something we found a lot in the work of Guy Mees, the question of authorship.
I mean, the withdrawal of the author was a strong conversation at the time among many artists, and it is known that Guy Mees considered himself as a workman, as a worker. He had a strong idea of art, but certainly not as something that you would put on a pedestal. For him, art was a daily practice, and in the conversation you had with Micheline and Wim and Dirk Snowart, I think it's Dirk Snowart who describes Guy Mees as a Marxist, and I think it is in this sense that
without being communist.
That he would be, without being communist, because it's not a question of ideology. It's a question of being grounded in the reality and in something that is it's not an artistic career. It's a practice, and I think this is why also we would say today that Guy Mees was an artist, an artist for artists, and first of all because his involvement in art is mostly a matter of friendship, a small circle of people he would know well, and in which he has embedded his whole activity as an artist. So it's not what you would say, what you would call, a professional career. It was his choice to remain among friends with whom he could discuss art, he could visit exhibitions, he could get concerned with political questions, but always, in this small circle of people. And I think this is what allows as well his criticality or his skepticism that creates this kind of attitude. So this is a very good example. For instance, this is probably the work that looks in Guy Mees' work, the work that looks closer to conceptual art, documented through pictures and with a very simple process. You have 3 blocks of cellular concrete. He creates with them this podium, and the work is called Differences of Levels. Level differences. And with them he's mocking up the creation of a system. So it's he will.
You can read the system. There's actually it's like 6 position, 3 person, 3 layer, and 6 position.
So he will exhaust the possibilities. 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3, 3, 1, 2, etc., etc. So this is the beginning of a system. But what is interesting is what he will do with this system.
A system that's gonna bring to a kind of new experience of pictoriality. Why it doesn't want to open this? Okay. Sorry. Yes. Okay, so you're gonna see also this work in the exhibition. For each position, he gave 1 color. And this is a kind of chromatic code. He started to develop in the early 1970s. That bring to the series of drawing with a felt pen. You also will see in the exhibition. And actually...
So there is a code, but...
Yeah.
Actually, what you see in these drawings is a complete random order. From this code, it's only the pretext for expanding experiments in color that immediately emancipate from any systematic order.
And the fascinating thing is that those different works you're gonna see. Well, this is another document following, like again, the system, the permutation system, mathematics, that is becoming more and more aleatory, more and more random. You see here another kind of grid and possibilities of position, which is undone. And then this principle of position has been presented in several contexts. The exhibition space, here actually you see Nicolas Serrota with his wife and the assistant at Museum Oxford in 1974. You see here the exhibition. But it can be also the kid of the artist into a landscape, or some friends in the garden, or even like this is typical the Belgium countryside, Flemish, or even like this is super nice. They don't exist yet to photograph. They come from a little slide we found in the archive, and this I think it's you lot, right, with the kids from profile back. So really showing all the various multiple possibility of the ordinary actually, and of the flow of the life actually.
And here Guy Mees is close to artists like Douglas Rubler or I don't know, maybe Dennis Oppenheim, who mocked up the structuralism of conceptual art and like criticized the idea of systems as a neutral tool. adding this contradiction of the most extreme subjectivity to the grid or to the system. This subjectivity can be the random order, or can be the exposure of intimate life, the use of anecdotes, and finally the inscription of the art into daily life.
Yeah, and it's also what is interesting with those series is also the statute of the photograph, because they can be really lambda, 70s image, or Polaroids, or contact sheets work, or like black and white photographs. You will see several formats which are all actually the same, because the question of the format was also not very important for Guy Mees. So all those different exploration about permutation system will bring step by step to the fantastic works which are a turning point into Guy Mees' career, made on silk paper. You see here there is a kind of precarious grid done with a delicate tape, delicate way of taping, and actually the little line became a kind of sparse constellation of dots, pastel dots. And so the system, of course, has totally disappeared into kind of, let's say, a kind of score partition. And you also see that the little motifs try to escape the frame. And what is very interesting also with those works is that the main support, the main support become the form, the shape, the color. And here you have a kind of souvenance of the last grid of the
Can you zoom
line.
in?
Yes. The quality is not very good, but they are very beautiful work, because actually you could miss the dots. So they are really like works that invite you to a kind of tactile approach. You could miss them or not. Like this, by instance. There is some few there. But what is super interesting, and with Guy Mees also, it's always this kind of balance between a rigoristic construction and this very delicate, intuitive touch, we can say. And
so this is typical of his escapism, like from the, let's say, the classical or typical conceptual art. In a few years, he moved to something that was so much more idiosyncratic, so much more difficult to grasp and to talk about, and like he escaped this sphere of discourse to enter a field of pure perception, pure tactility. And you said before that it was absurdist, but I don't quite agree with the notion of absurdity in the work
kind of
Guy
absurd
Mees.
boredom. I mean, with like even Fernand Spielmacher was talking about it. You know, the fact to repeat like the line, the fact that you climb into the pedestal, the stairs. When you see Guy Mees going down from his own stairs, you know, there is a kind of.
But this absurdity would involve a sort of global meaninglessness, and I don't feel Guy Mees being metaphysical in this sense. I think he's very materialist, and his work is a materialist work grounded on reality, on daily life, with his controversial aspects like its beauty and its ugliness, its boredom and its intensity, and its in this sense, I find it's more materialist than absurdist in this metaphysical sense.
So a materialist, and materialism, absurdism.
Okay, let's agree on this.
Let's talk about this work, which is also super interesting. It's a paravent. You see here a bit the same system of dots on the corner, where he puts some shape, looking as a bit of little skirt. And here it's super interesting because it's not anymore like, it's not purely abstract, it's not purely figurative, it's really in between. Of course, again, full of sensuality, referring to femininity. And that brings us to the imaginary ballet he has developed in the 80s. Here you have an exhibition, you have a view of his studio. So that's, I would like you to comment those work, François.
It's a hard task but we should finish on this work because it's on the one hand it's already 7, but it's also the last series he developed, and they almost look naive in their figuration. So they look like skirts and dresses. They still are on these very fragile papers pinned on the wall. So they are not images, they are actually bodies. They can move with the wind. And this is very important. I think it's an important pattern for Guy Mees, that he didn't aim at creating images. He aimed at creating bodies. Organisms as something alive. He was not so concerned with the preservation of his work, and he was very aware that his work involves a dedicated attention in the present moment, but this can vanish, this can disappear, and his whole work could have disappeared, and it's your effort and like the mutual effort of many people to prevent this work from disappearing completely. I would like to end with a question to you. What are as a curator, how is it to make Guy Mees' work alive again?
Actually, it was quite complex because I had the chance to meet very well Lot, the wife of Guy and Micheline. But still, I mean, the question of space is very, very important when you're presenting the work of Guy. And presenting a work of Guy Mees into a glass pavilion was the most challenging thing we could do, actually. And I'm really happy with the solution we found. We have creating a new architecture, a new void, new space to welcome those work. And I think it works.
But I haven't seen the show yet. First of all, congratulations to you both, François Lilou. I have to add some thank yous, but also one comment. I think it has a lot, indirectly you said that, I think his work had a lot to do also with his personal life. I think we shouldn't forget the humor, the huge parts of humor in his work, and in particular in the Belgian, especially in the Flemish scene of its time. And when you revisit artists of his time who were living there, there are plenty of people, I think, who need to be rediscovered, not only him. It's always interesting that you only see this one or two, the so-called central figures, but the central figures never could shape a whole era. So, and I think it's quite normal that artists get rediscovered every once a while. So, and it's also very important to understand it much better. I talked to briefly this morning, but now also to Lotte Guy who said, we were talking about the ties, and my father was born the same year, and he was also wearing ties, and I never saw him with a lace tie. So this, and then we talked about it. That I said, come on, that has a lot to do with, of course, gender critique, but also with erotic, yeah. So but in a very, this is life. Yeah? So this, and last weekend I was in Belgium and I met with Maria Gillissen-Brotas, the wife of Brotas. This is also someone who needs to be rediscovered. She was a photographer, what she did. Yeah? It's also, and people don't know. And we were looking at her photographs. That was also very beautiful to see. That was it, definitely, and I wish I would have been an adult in this time. It was definitely another time, much more full of maybe dark humor as well, but humor. Yeah? And the body was, in a way, more, if you look at it, more present, yeah? And how they translated it into art. That makes me very melancholic, in a way. I can't see it only in a conceptual way. So, but anyway, beautiful, and I'm waiting for the catalogue. I know the catalogue already. You have done a great job. And I also would like to thank Vanessa John Müller and Ellie Taylor, who did a lot of work on the catalogue as well. Vanessa John Müller, yeah. There are quite a lot of artists living in Belgium. I discovered here Peter Vermeersch, Manon de Boer. Great. And they can do the talk the next time in Flemish. It's sweet. It's very nice from two French. Yeah. No. It's beautiful. No? So, but especially if you know a little bit the Belgian context and the language battle in this country, then listening to French talking about a Flemish artist is beautiful, of course. Micheline Schweitzer also, and it's not only one person who can rediscover. There are plenty of people. Of course, Micheline Schweitzer, who did all these great exhibitions. And there's also Christian Nagel, who did last year a show in, was it last year or 2000? No, last year in Berlin. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Lilou, again. Have a great evening, and now go and see the show.